Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me is David Griscom. Hello, David.
Hey, brother. How's it going?
It's going pretty well. And joining me are nurses Erin and Sophia here to talk about a nursing strike that's going on in New Jersey. Erin, and let's start with Erin, you first, and then Sophia. Describe your roles, yourselves, your roles in the hospital you guys work at.
Sure. Hi, my name's Erin. I am an ICU nurse in Robert Wood Johnson in New Brunswick, New Jersey. I've been at the hospital for about 5 years. I work in the medical ICU, and we've been on strike for 75 days now.
My name's Sophia. I'm also an ICU nurse. I've also been at the hospital for 5 years in different roles before I became a nurse. I've sort of risen up through all the floors of the hospital from the ER now into the ICU. And I went to the university that is most associated with our hospital. I went to Rutgers, which has a partnership with our hospital through the medical school.
Very nice. And yeah, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but get into, like David, you were saying, the roles, the in sort of the best scenario, your job description, and then some of the other demands placed on you.
Sure. So, in an ideal situation, as an ICU nurse, I would have 2 patients. We work 12-hour shifts and work overnight. So, my job duties are to make sure that my patients are, clinically stable. We have very critical patients. The New Brunswick Hospital actually is the flagship hospital of the hospital system that we work for. It's a level 1 trauma center, designated stroke center. A lot of the sister hospitals in the area, actually, when the patients are too sick to be taken care of, will actually get transferred into our hospital in New Brunswick, and a lot of times actually into our unit to take care of. So we are dealing with some of the sickest patients in the state. The reason that we are on strike right now is for safe staffing, because a lot of times, we're asked to take care of more patients than, we're actually supposed to be able to handle, and our job duties go beyond just clinical patient care. We have to coordinate across many different disciplines in medicine, between the doctors, radiology, even like the kitchen and housekeeping. We have to coordinate all of that. We have to be the primary point of contact for family members and keep them updated. There's a lot that goes into it, more than just, taking the clinical picture of a patient, administering medications or, doing procedures on them, and then going home. It's really an all-encompassing, holistic role of a nurse.
Especially in the ICU. Before I worked there, I worked in a floor that would take ICU downgrades, a medical surgical floor that was like a step-down unit to the ICU. On floors like this with such high acuity and such sick patients, because our patients really are some of the sickest in the state, and sometimes from other states as well, because we can provide specific surgeries or procedures that other places just can't. We are the coordinators of care for these patients. We are the people arranging their physical therapy, occupational therapy, the way that they are able to eat, being able to move around, get accustomed to whatever surgery they got or whatever procedure they went through, and essentially making sure that every aspect, getting them back to normal life, is happening for them. We are like their cruise ship director for their entire hospital stay.
And can you define for folks safe staffing? Because, Sudha Bhattacharya, who has this piece, quoting at least you, Sophia, mentions that this has been an issue that nurses around the country have won strikes on. But just for define folks what safe staffing is.
Safe staffing is based on evidence-based research. It is specific nurse-to-patient ratios based on acuity and based on the specific patient care area, saying that this many patients is appropriate for this kind of nurse, and this is the kind of ratio that must be upheld so that we can provide the utmost care for our patient population. When we disregard these ratios that are proven in the research, we notice that patients end up sicker, more sentinel events happen, like injury to patients, medication errors, or otherwise coordination of care is lacking. So with this ratio, enforcing it has never really happened in our hospital and across many others, which is why so many people go on strike for safe staffing ratios. If we're unable to provide the correct amount of nurses for patients, our patients are the ones who suffer the most.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like the public's sort of desire to also want you guys to get that assured by the hospitals, like that should be fairly clear. You go into a hospital, you want to make sure there's enough nurses on staff. Now talk about like, so some of these hospitals, they do have these, oh yeah, we'll do safe staffing, and then there's like ways they get out of that.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is, they'll put in what they call safe staffing guidelines. But the thing that makes a guideline different from a policy is that a guideline is not enforceable. So the thing that we've really been fighting for on our contract is to have enforceable safe staffing policy put in place. So some of the things that the hospital tries to do to actually get around the safe staffing is, they'll look at that nurse to patient ratio that we're supposed to have, and then they'll count people like our managers into that staffing ratio. And they'll say, oh, you guys do have enough people for the nurses. Or they'll say that if a nurse calls out sick, they're not going to be responsible to uphold that staffing ratio because it's, the nurse's fault that the floor is short-staffed. They also do, I won't get too into the weeds with it because it's a little bit complicated, but they propose something that they're calling a core deficit, which pretty much means that they would only uphold staffing ratio if our staffing levels drop below a certain percentage. So what that means is if we have a unit that has 10 nurses and they say our core deficit is 17%, you can't, if we're lacking one nurse, they'll say, well, you're not under 17%. So we actually have to be below 2 nurses to get that. Instead of just going based off of raw numbers that says for each nurse that has an extra patient, this is the penalty. They're saying, well, let's find a bunch of different ways to work around it. And this is actually, even beyond staffing, just something that hospitals do across the board that I think probably a lot of people aren't really aware of. They find ways to like fudge numbers everywhere. Our hospital is actually the largest private employer in New Jersey, and they're constantly going on and on about all these different stats and metrics that they are hitting, but a lot of those numbers are fudged. Like recently, they actually remodeled the emergency room to decrease wait times by just making the waiting area smaller. So instead of people waiting in the waiting room, they're now waiting once they get into the ED, and that's not counted as a wait time. So they do that kind of stuff when it comes to like our staffing ratios and really just anywhere that they can find to try and like make themselves look better and get away with not doing the right thing, they'll do it.
Yeah, I mean, the prerogative, because you mentioned the evidence-based safe staffing, conclusions that have been arrived at by people not, motivated to save money on the bottom line, but actually to save lives. And to put up against, like, I'm sure that 17% number, that wasn't arrived at by the evidence-based process. That's just something they added to, give themselves a way out.
Yeah, that would never be something that the nursing research would provide for, especially because, like, how are you going to have 17% of real people in the numbers? It's not whole numbers. It's not whole people. So it's just, it gets around the problem entirely. It's just another tactic to get around the core issue, which is that if we don't have the right amount of nurses, we cannot provide the right kind of care for our patients, especially because if we're going to be a level 1 trauma center, a nationally recognized stroke center, a certified cancer center, and provide all of these services that you can't get anywhere else, there's not one hospital in the area that has all of those things at the level that we do with the amount of nurses and staff that we do. If we can't provide the correct staff for that, we can't actually execute that higher level of care.
So like on this, like, because this is something that we're seeing across the board in like the labor movement, right? Is like fighting over scheduling, right? One, because of how abusive it is for people who are laboring, right, to have to pick up extra work. But two, because there's like, dramatic safety concerns. Like, for example, the railroad workers, this was one of the big things that they were, fighting about, because they were having too few people on those trains to be able to make sure that they were safely staffed. Just so the audience is really clear, when y'all are going into these contract negotiations, one of these negotiations, are the people y'all are negotiating with the people who are usually walking around the floors of the ICU area or things like that during the day, or is this a different kind of group of folks?
No, so the negotiation team for the hospital is all administration staff, people that we don't see on the floors. It's a very large hospital system. I think something like 12, 16, some above 10 hospitals in the system. And, like I said, it's the largest employer in Jersey. It's 37,000 employees. So these people are not present. They don't care about patient safety. They see patients as names and numbers on a spreadsheet. It's all statistical. They're really so far removed from the human element of it. Just to give another example with a way that they get out of these staffing ratios is just in the last contract that we voted down to go on strike, they had actually written in wording that would absolve them from staffing responsibility in the case of a public health emergency or a mass casualty event. And just coming out of, the back end of the COVID-19 pandemic, which really exposed like a lot of the issues that have been going on for so long, for them to write out language that, absolves them during a public health emergency was, it was insulting, and it was really so counterproductive to any protections that we would put in place.
Yeah. It's
Can you just describe? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sophie. I was curious. Can you just? Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
I just want like your descriptions, like help people understand what it's like to go into a shift that's short-staffed.
We are not as short-staffed in the ICU as we really are on the medical and surgical floors. I worked on the trauma surgical unit for almost 2 years as a nurse, and we would often, our census was to have 9 nurses, and that was fully staffed based on the amount of patients that we could support on the unit. I would often walk in and we would have 3 on the schedule, and we would be calling the nursing office and administration left and right to beg for float nurses and support staff because we could not get through the day. And managers were taking assignments, directors were taking assignments, and it was really scary. Walking into a shift like that when you know you're going to be taking care of an unsafe amount of patients with few resources, often doing the jobs of other people because we're also short-staffed when it comes to ancillary staff. There's no one picking up the phone. There's nobody delivering the food trays. There is nobody cleaning the patients, getting the vitals, turning the patients every 2 hours to prevent bed sores. All of these tasks that we aren't limited to. We can do any of these jobs, but we can't do all of the jobs of the hospital all of the time. It's impossible. Knowing that you're going to deliver subpar care is dehumanizing. It is so shameful because we know what good care is and we know we're capable of it. We know what it looks like. And I hate to be the face on the receiving end for that patient being told that they have to wait for medicine or to eat food or to be cleaned because they soiled themselves, because I literally cannot be in 10 places at once. It's wrong. It's not what any of us wanted to become a nurse for.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine it must be really disillusioning. Go ahead, Aaron.
To add on to that, from the like a more ICU based perspective as well, I'm supposed to have 2 patients. Some of the ICUs even have a 1-to-1 patient ratio because the patients are so sick. So when you add another patient onto that workload, you're looking at potentially doubling or, adding 50% more workload. And, in the ICU, a lot of our patients are on ventilators. They're getting medications that actually require like minute to minute monitoring and adjustment sometimes, like life support drugs. And, a lot of our handling of, that workflow is based on actually being able to like visibly see both of your patients at the same time. You're listening for the alarms. We work together in teams a lot, and we'll call a partner over to come help us with stuff. It's not like, even though you have your own two patients, it's not just a one person job. We all work together as a team. And when someone's inundated with extra work to do, another person that they have to listen to a monitor for, or listen to an IV pump for, or a ventilator alarming, it not only makes it more difficult for them to do their job, but it makes it more difficult for the entire floor to work effectively as a team, because it really takes that person out of that dynamic. And it also makes the rest of the team have to work harder to pick up that person's slack too. So, when we're getting these like difficult ratios, it's not even something that you have time to prepare for. It's something when you come in, you find out when you get to work. And, it doesn't matter if you had a bad night's sleep the night before, anything else. Like, you got to be working at 200% just to get done like what needs to get done to keep people alive. I mean, quite frankly, it's not something that is, to be messed around with. I mean, it's people's lives, it's people's health. When someone gets so sick, a lot of times they can't come back from that. And it really requires a lot of attention, a lot of very delicate, close attention to what you're doing.
No one's health outcomes should be impacted by a hospital being somehow unable to supply staff members. But if you don't have safe staffing, especially in these high acuity areas like the ICU, if you don't have eyes on all your patients, people will suffer, and they do. It's so wrong and so avoidable.
It's such a, like David mentioned about like the rail strikes. It's one. I can understand CVS not hiring enough staff, and then, giving profits to shareholders and, not really caring about the staff there. This seems like something that we should not be, like you said, Aaron, messing around with. This is literal life and death every day. Talk a little bit about COVID. And, I know you don't have a whole bunch of experience pre-COVID, but you mentioned a lot of these problems pre-existed COVID. Just talk about how COVID exacerbated that, and maybe like did that bring your sort of awareness to like we need to act collectively as a union to address this stuff?
Yeah, so I actually have maybe a bit of an interesting perspective on the COVID thing, because when I first started working at the hospital in 2018, I was actually in one of the very few departments that has nurses working who are not unionized. So I actually worked, it's the dialysis department. I did dialysis in the hospital for about 3 years before I transferred over into the ICU in a unionized unit. So I worked through COVID without a union, regularly, 18, 20-hour shifts, coming in, breaking my back, just trying to keep people alive. I'm in the rooms with patients where there's not even 6 feet of separation, dialyzing them, back to back to back. We didn't have enough supplies, so we're turning in our N95 masks at the end of our shift to get sterilized and returned to us when we come back the next day. Working like 70, 80 hours a week, because there just wasn't any people to come help us. And, we didn't have a choice to say no. There was no way to say, I'm not going to take care of that patient. I'm going to go home because I need to rest. That's not an option. And, during the pandemic, I think a lot of the senior nursing staff, probably across the country, honestly, was, seeing this as like, you know what, I've had my career. This is my time to kind of retire. I don't need to get myself into this. I've been working for 30 years. I'm getting old. I'm vulnerable. So we did see a mass exodus of a lot of the senior nurses during the pandemic. Because of that, when new nurses are graduating from nursing school, they're getting out of college, they're coming into this hospital and other big hospitals, and they don't have the staff to support them. The working conditions are not great. The resources aren't there to, help bolster retention. They're staying in the career for, a year, 2 years, and then they're leaving either to go to a smaller hospital where they'll get paid, the same amount or even more to have like a lower stress job. They're doing, outpatient services, or they're saying, you know what, I could go back to school, do another 2 years, become a nurse practitioner, and then I don't have to work at the bedside with patients. So, a lot of what we're striking for with safe staffing, we know that if we are able to secure a contract that has this in policy, it's not going to turn things around overnight. But we're looking at a long-term goal here of, the hospital, obviously the reason they don't want to enforce it is because it hurts their profit. So if there's some kind of financial risk for them to keep us short-staffed, and there's no financial incentive for them to maintain low staffing ratios, it's going to actually force the executive board to do what their job is and find creative solutions to these types of problems, whether that means, some kind of retention bonuses, investing in nursing schools, and just, general things that they can do to make the workplace better for us. If that's what they have to do, that's what they have to do, because the system as it is not sustainable. We're seeing nurses are coming in, they're not staying. Older nurses are retiring at much higher rates than before, and something has to change.
I worked as an EMT throughout COVID. I got my EMT license when I was 17, and I stopped when I became a nurse. And I also worked in the ER at the hospital we work at as a tech throughout COVID for a couple of years. And so I was always in that setting throughout the peak of COVID for the next 2 years through it. There were so many travelers in the ER that it was unrecognizable. You didn't know who people were anymore when I had been working with those people for a long time already. It was shocking to see how many people had left because there was a mass exodus of people who were already considering retiring. So many people went into early retirement. And while being in nursing school at the same time, while all of this was going on, with the college that the hospital has the greatest relationship with to try to recruit new grads and get people into the field, there was a sense of nursing is not sustainable anymore. This is not a career that you can do your whole life anymore, because if we go through global health emergencies, if people consistently have multiple comorbidities, if the American population is generally unhealthier and something like coronavirus can take down so many people and just inundate our health system, then you need to have a backup plan as a nurse. Nobody wants to be a bedside nurse as a career anymore, but it shouldn't be that way, because it's an extremely rewarding career. There's no such thing as being just a nurse and needing to go back to school and do something else, because there's nothing better that you can do than, if what you want to do is provide care for people, then do it directly at the bedside. And our career is struggling because we have been given so many tasks that are not our own, and being stretched so thin with so little staffing, not just in our hospital, but across the nation.
Yeah, you mentioned travelers and travel nurses, and I wanted to ask that too, because that seems like not a great sign. I know somebody who's going through nursing school right now, and from a young nurse's standpoint, where especially if you're indebted, I can understand why the top line of salary or how much you're going to earn in a couple weeks traveling to some hospital and filling in, like you say, spots. They pay a lot, but they have to pay that because I imagine even psychically as a travel nurse, you're going into situations that are short-staffed by definition, or they wouldn't be calling you. And so you're put in this situation where here's a lot of extra money to do an inadequate job. And how many people are going to want to do that? Even for the huge amounts. But I'm just curious, your perspectives on the travelers. You've already mentioned it, Sophia, the difficulty knowing who's around you and the institutional knowledge of where stuff is and how stuff is done in a certain hospital.
Yeah, the travelers aren't given a lot of orientation time, especially in the case of our strike. They were onboarded within days and weren't trained by staff nurses who were on the premises. So they were off of the hospital grounds, in offices, in computer labs, learning the computer system, doing everything that they could do to be as prepared as possible to take over care. And I've worked with a lot of really great travelers. I have nothing against people doing what they need to do and filling that role because it obviously exists, but it is clearly not a long-term solution. And travel rates are not what they were during coronavirus. They were insane, and you can make so much money traveling, but that money is running out because the trend to go become a traveler, the supply is not meeting the demand. We have so many people who leave the bedside now to go make more money in that role, but not only are there so many issues with traveling, you don't get enough time to onboard, you don't necessarily know the system, you're more inclined to make errors or mistakes, you don't know what you're doing if you don't work at the hospital for so long, and it doesn't promote retention or continuity of care. The money also just isn't there anymore for a lot of people because if hospitals rely so heavily on travelers and people continue to leave the hospital to travel, it's going to equal out eventually. It's just not sustainable. It's going to crash.
Yeah. I also want to add to that, I think something that really gets heavily overlooked when it comes to staffing an entire hospital or, relying on travelers to fill out large gaps in staffing is, a lot of people coming into the different areas and everything may not be as educated on the culture of that area. In Jersey and especially in New Brunswick, we have a very, very diverse cultural population, and a lot of those cultural considerations need to be taken into account when it comes to people's care. So when you have nurses coming in large swaths from maybe more rural areas that, the nurses may not have a lot of experience dealing with, a very dense Indian population or Hasidic Jewish population or a Muslim population that, there's, different quirks to working with different people that, they don't get just educated on during their onboarding. It's something that, they have to be either told on the job, or it needs to be, or it can create an awkward or difficult situation for a family or something like that. And, I think it's just not really the right approach. That being said, I also want to say there's levels to the travel nursing thing. Especially in terms of the strike, because there is actually an industry of scab nurses. There are nursing agencies that are set up specifically to staff hospitals during strikes to try and relieve pressure from the hospital put on by the union. The nurses who actually sign up to work with these agencies go into it knowing that they're going in there to help break a strike. But there are also other travel nursing agencies that the nurses sign up for thinking it's a regular travel gig, and they sign the contract and it's kept hidden from them that they're actually going to be working at a striking hospital. So I would advise if any nurses are listening to not pick up a travel contract in New Brunswick. And if you are a prospective nurse or prospective traveling nurse, try and do some research into the hospital that you're going to, because it's very possible that you could be going in there to break a strike, and you might be crossing a picket line without even knowing it. So I would say that that's definitely something to look out for and keep in mind when it comes to like travel nurses.
Yeah, I wasn't. I'll let you go, Dave. But I wasn't fortunate enough to see some TikTok activity of people defending travel nurse and scabbing, and it's like, come on, guys, let's wind it in a little bit. Go ahead, David.
I mean, yeah, I think we played it on the show, Matt. It was pretty rough, but
did, yeah.
Well, I mean, I was just hoping maybe we could take it to the strike a little bit, and y'all could talk about the tactics, how long y'all have been on there, and also, talk about the political side of it, like your ability to picket and do things like that, because that's obviously an important part of the story as well.
Yeah. So today is day 75 of the strike. We went on strike on August 4th. Pretty much for the first 60 days, negotiations were almost non-existent. Anytime that the hospital did meet with us, it was because they were called on by the federal mediator, and it was just bad faith negotiations. They refused to budge on anything. They took away our health insurance at the end of August. It was obviously an attempt by the hospital to try and make us more desperate, to just take whatever contract they put on the table. But, the union has been very strong. No one's crossed the picket line. What the hospital has been doing to try and break our union actually has been like just disgusting. What they've done several times since the beginning of the strike is they'll actually send text messages to the entire nursing staff directly, going over the heads of the union leadership, feeding us propaganda, trying to turn us against our union, trying to tear us apart. I think it's kind of backfired on them because it's really gotten people more fired up, and it's kind of gone to show like how they feel about us. But we've just been getting extremely patronizing text messages. Robert Wood Johnson is a very powerful political entity. They sponsor a lot of the media in the area, so we have been facing a coordinated media blackout. 1,700 nurses on strike for 2.5 months, you would think would be a bigger deal than what you see, just casually browsing, even like labor-centric publications. There's really not a lot of coverage, and it's because it's been silenced at the source. There's local news just has not really been too interested in covering us. The CEO of our hospital is also on the board of governors at Rutgers University, and he was appointed by Governor Murphy. So there's definitely some like deep-seated political connections that the hospital has there. It's been a very difficult battle. Because we just don't have the resources that the hospital has. And the strongest thing that we do have is our message, because it's such a common sense thing, even just like separating the line between like a nurse and a patient. I don't see myself as being like on a different tier of person than the people I take care of, because everyone has a body. Everyone's going to get sick at some point. If my family or my friends get sick, like that's the hospital they're going to go to. Like, I want it to be a good hospital because it's the hospital my community uses. You know what I mean? So, hurting us from being able to spread that message to our community, it's been really detrimental. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Sophia.
I agree. I grew up in the area, and I always wanted to work at Robert Wood. I always wanted to go to Rutgers, work at Robert Wood, be a nurse. I had one dream, and here it is. It's been really disappointing, especially since this was the hospital I went to as a kid. This was the hospital my family members use. I have relatives who've worked in the hospital. It's well known that for a long time it was revered as the best place you could possibly work, and there was a waiting list to get a job there. Now they can't hold staff, and it's because the culture has changed and the priorities have changed, and it's no longer about staff. It's no longer about caring for one another and making sure that we can do a good job and we're well supplied and we have the resources and the people to do a good job. It's about costs, and it doesn't feel the way it used to. It doesn't feel like somewhere you should be really proud and excited to work at. It's been a letdown, especially with, like you said, Erin, the kind of messaging that we're getting from the hospital as we continue to be on strike, the different tactics that they have used to weaken our resolve and otherwise make us doubt the point of our message and force us to question if what we're doing is the right thing, maligning us constantly in the media and getting on our back about, are we too loud on the picket line, or are we disrupting traffic when it's our First Amendment right to do what we're doing and to fight for our patients, and it's what we should do. It's been really, really disgusting.
And the injunctions.
And the injunctions, yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, so we actually got picket line injunctions put in place about 2 or 3 weeks ago now, that pretty much prevents us from having more than 15 people out of a base of 1,700. clustered together. Everyone has to be more than 20 feet apart. We're not allowed to use bullhorns.
I don't know. Sorry to cut you off, but I don't know how we talk about free speech in this country. And it's all about, like, are the racists too moderated on social media? Like, you literally have all these people you could bring to a picket line, and the court's like, nah. And I don't understand how. I mean, I understand why, but legally, I don't understand how.
It's free speech until it makes our corporation look bad, and it disturbs the community because it's too loud that you're asking for the ability to take care of them so that you don't worry that you're going to walk into work one day and accidentally kill them. It's free speech until you make us look bad.
Right.
Because, like, but that's the thing is, like, what you said about, like, the pride in that. I'm from Bismarck, North Dakota, and the hospitals in that city are like, we'd like to have these hospitals here. These are a pride of the city, and that we can see in front of our eyes. These be turned into something being hollowed out by profiteers that have no sort of connection to actually delivering care. Like, this is, like, we talk about, like, it's not just the health thing. It's like having pride in your society. You should not look at the hospital down the street and be like, they can't even, that floor I'm looking at from the outside, not even enough nurses on there to treat the patients.
New Brunswick is called the healthcare city for a reason. It has 2 major academic centers, a giant university. It has more research than most Big Ten universities. There should be so much support for what we're fighting for. It's really, they've shown their true colors. It's not what they care about.
We're healthcare heroes until we speak up and try to do something heroic and help the community, and then all of a sudden we're villainized. So
hey, well, guys, I'll clap for you out my window if that helps too.
No pots and pans because that's too loud.
Yeah, no pots and pans.
Yeah, a little bit of recognition. Well, how can people help? What can people do to give you guys aid? Where should we direct people?
Right. So first, I want to say we've been getting like a huge support from the community that we've actually been able to reach, and a lot of the other unions in the area. Our biggest ally through the strike has actually been like the Rutgers AAUP AFT union, which they just had their historic strike back in the spring. They've been huge. DSA, PSL, Our Revolution, they've all been big supporters. How can people help? I would say number one is, again, if you're a traveling nurse, don't take a contract in New Brunswick. You're hurting our strike. Number two, we have social media channels that you can follow for updates. We're on Facebook and Instagram at RWJ Nurses United. I also am co-chairing a new coalition that we're forming to actually unify nurses and nursing unions across the state with community organizations. I think one of the big fights that we know is that, because our hospital is such a big major hospital, it really sets the bar for healthcare across the state. So whatever victory we're able to get is going to be widespread. So I want to really openly, publicly organize with nurses and other nursing unions. So if you're a nurse in New Jersey, or if you know a nurse, we have a website that we set up, safestaffingnj.org. You can get in touch with us about joining our coalition. Whether you're in a union or not, please reach out. The last thing is there are bills that are actually sitting at the state level, proposed bills that need to be passed through. So that's Bill S304 and A4536, which actually are what the coalition is trying to put pressure on politicians to pass. So call your legislators and ask them to please push those bills through.
Sophia and Aaron, I can't thank you guys enough, and the rest of your union and nurses for fighting for this. And keep in touch any way that we can help down the line. Thanks so much for going out on limb for workers and patients, and everybody who wants to have pride in their society. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks
for having us on.